Hello, and welcome to the webinar, 6 Key Trends to Watch in 2026. My name is Matt Watton. I'm an analyst here at Lux Research, and I'll be moderating today's session. Presenting today are my colleagues Cheryl Auger, Senior Research Director of Consumer Insights, and Brad Hall, an analyst here at Lux. Throughout the webinar, you could type any questions you have in the question box on your screen, and time permitting, we will answer all the questions that we can. If your question doesn't get answered, don't worry. And you could always email us at questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will respond. If at any point you're experiencing technical difficulties like a frozen screen, simply refresh your browser and check your internet connection is strong. But enough from me. Let's jump into the presentation. Take it away, guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. So recently, we've been noticing a wave of imagery that's gained attention by doing something deceptively simple, and that's showing things as they really are. Across culture and commerce, visuals are becoming closer, more tactile, and more honest, leaving in things like texture, irregularity, and detail rather than polishing them away. From fashion campaigns that foreground real bodies to product imagery and political imagery that highlights grain, foam, and wear, this approach is cutting through the noise in a way that refined visuals no longer can. And its impact goes beyond aesthetics. That's because these images reflect several of the shifts that we're here to talk about today. In an AI-saturated environment, texture and imperfection are emerging as trust signals. Rough stone, for example, that shows as fractures, linen that looks rumpled and even lived in, drinks that emphasize foam and creaminess all signal authenticity because texture is associated with what feels real. At the same time, there's a broader cultural appetite for transparency and vulnerability. Details that were once edited out, things like wrinkles, grains, unevenness, now read as honest, confident, and modern. They suggest nothing is being hidden and point to a growing sense of digital fatigue. As media becomes smoother, faster, and more artificial, many people are craving visible proof of the human. With those themes in mind, things like texture, transparency, vulnerability, and digital fatigue, let's look at how these forces are shaping the trends that we'll see in 2026 and beyond.
Great, thanks for that introduction, Cheryl. So what we have on our agenda for today is I want to start by giving a short overview of our approach and our methods in identifying these key trends for the coming year. After that, we'll dive into the trends themselves, tell you what they are, what they mean for your business looking ahead, and then we'll finish with some of the key top-line insights that you can take back with you. So let's dive in then, starting with our approach and our methodology. So we call our approach predictive anthropology, and that's because we use anthropological methods of research and analysis to try to understand not just where consumer conversations and sentiments sit today, but where they're headed in the future. Now, to do that work, we utilize a combination of AI through our virtual anthropologist platform, but always in conjunction with human expertise. That's our team of PhD researchers. This combination allows us to scan millions of data points from all across consumer conversations online, and then to carry out deep ethnographic research into the trends, the beliefs, the behaviors, the unmet needs, and so forth that we see emerging from all of that chatter. And it lets us do it all at very large scale. It's important to note, though, that we're not just tracking mentions of topics online, like some traditional social listening tools. Our platforms open up the fuller context of consumer chatter, and this gives us the chance to interpret it with more depth and more detail. That's what helps us uncover the implicit meanings and associations that aren't always apparent at the surface level of consumer conversations. And lastly, analyzing how these conversations change over time, whether it's a subtle change or a drastic one, is what makes it possible for us to predict the future of consumer culture, to identify not just where consumers are right now, but where they're going next. Now, to identify our top trends for this upcoming year, 2026, what our team did was to look back at our research over the past year and identify dominant patterns that we saw emerging. From there, we dug in deeper to find some early signs of cultural shifts. where were the new topics, the new conversations, the new associations starting to form in consumers' minds? And where were they starting to stick? Now, we also prioritized trends that are relevant across multiple CPG categories. And that's because we're on the lookout for higher level trends that we expect to impact consumer behavior broadly, not just in a single industry or a single category. The trends that have strong implications for virtually all CPG brands across the board. So in our discussion today, we're going to share some specific examples of some of the industries likely to be impacted. But if something's jumping out at you and you'd like to discuss about your industry or your brand in particular, then please reach out to our team of analysts. We're always happy to do a deep dive into what it all means for you, for your business, and moving your goals forward this year. So with that, let's have a quick look at this year's 6 key trends. I'm going to throw it back to you, Cheryl, for a quick overview of our themes, and then we'll take them one by one in a little more depth.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that great overview. So without further ado, our key trends to watch in the year ahead include gender relations and the rise of emotional equity and availability. And I should note that all of our trends are organized against our priorities that we use to organize all of our syndicated work. So in this case, it was one example of a value-based choice and some shifting values that we're seeing. Our second trend is related to financial empowerment, and we're going to explain the rise of affordable premium and what that means for business. Third, looking at memorable experiences, we're seeing that consumers are increasingly interested in physical ownership and analog tools in order to reclaim their agency and feel more in control. What are our last 3 trends, Brad?
So our fourth trend is going to zoom in on how consumers are currently in the process of reimagining everyday life through community building. Topics like belonging, like mutual care, lower pressure human connection. These are some of the things that we've seen buzzing in conversations about what well-being means in an increasingly fragmented modern world. Then for trend 5, we get into another interesting way that consumers are pushing back against the disembodied feel of digital life. What we're seeing is that they're turning away from screens and back into their bodies. They're looking for authentic experiences they can feel with all of their senses, not just their eyes on a screen. And then for our 6th and final trend for 2026, we're going to get into consumers evolving, or we could even say deteriorating, relationship with big tech. They're complaining about what they see as a lack of accountability on the part of tech companies. And that's been paired with a steep decline in the quality of platforms, the quality of the user experience. We'll talk about how they're responding and what brands can do to meet their changing expectations. So with that, back to you for our first key trend, Cheryl.
Great. Yeah, so let's take a look at what's taking place when it comes to shifting values. And I'm going to talk about gender relations. But to begin, I want to note that we're very well aware that there's a fairly loud model of masculinity in American culture right now. It's focused on dominance, control, as well as public strength. However, it's also important to note that there's a quieter shift at play, and it's something that we can use our tools to identify, right? First of all, emotional norms are changing. Young men are increasingly embracing vulnerability and emotional openness, while women are prioritizing autonomy and balance. We see this very clearly in culture. Romance stories like Hated Rivalry center male leads who communicate. They feel deeply, and they value mutual care. On social platforms, we see younger men openly talking about mental health, attachment styles, and self-improvement, language that would have been taboo just a generation ago. Along those lines, partnership is becoming more equitable. Men are taking on more caregiving and household responsibility. Emotional labor is something that people expect to be shared. Of course, I'm not suggesting that there's full equality in the home or in caregiving, but what's notable is norms are shifting, and they're going to continue to shift in 2026 and beyond, with some profound implications for how people shop and what they buy. Furthermore, dating is being rewritten. Dating and romance are moving away from rigid gender roles toward flexibility and authenticity. queer and bisexual storylines are mainstream, consent and communication are core values, and younger audiences are gravitating towards relationships that are built on negotiation rather than conquest. And this is taking place even as dating apps and polarized debates are creating a lot of noise. The cultural center of gravity is moving toward empathy, balance, and shared responsibility. Brands that cling to a dominance-based notion of masculinity risk feeling out of touch and out of step, while those that reflect emotional intelligence and inclusivity align with where we see gender norms headed. So what does this mean for brands? Well, show shared responsibility in action. Depict men and women equally engaged in caregiving, decision-making, and emotional work, but don't make it a headline. Furthermore, we need to consider how we can design for emotional intelligence. Products, services, and experiences should not only reduce friction, but should support shifts in well-being and respect for autonomy rather than rigid fixes that over-direct users. All right, let's take a look at our next trend. Brad, over to you.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. So before we dive into this one, a quick plug here for a recent webinar we released on the new affordability mindset that we're seeing in consumer conversations. So if you want a deeper dive into the affordability landscape of 2026, highly recommend you check that out to get a fuller picture of this theme that's going to be crucial for navigating consumer needs this year. So consumers, of course, are always concerned about affordability, but we're currently witnessing a shift in their thinking about it. What started with a rise in inflation that felt temporary after the pandemic has since evolved into a full-blown cost of living crisis that's feeling more permanent to consumers. It felt like a short-term squeeze, but it now feels like a lasting erosion to quality of life. And this is making consumers increasingly sensitive to everyday compromises. Things like small, affordable upgrades, everyday moments of premium experience are going to matter more than ever to consumers this year, since they're tired of the feeling of having to constantly make trade-offs, the feeling that they're not getting good value for their dollars. What we're seeing emerging in response to these tensions is a consumer mindset that prizes micro-optimizations, little splurges that fit the budget while still offering a tangible quality of life increase. For example, minor boosts to health, to comfort, or to well-being that make the grind of daily life feel a little bit more elevated. And even more than that, make consumers feel like they're still moving forward in life, not stuck in place, not treading water. So then what's this all mean for brands? It means consumer loyalty more and more is about balancing premium feel that delivers elevated moments with reasonable pricing that brings people back. Value is about small upgrades that don't feel limited to just an occasional splurge, but that can fit economically into regular routines, into everyday life. Consumers are exhausted from years of navigating the tension between joy and cost. Brands that land in the middle, for example, elevated basics that aren't boutique priced, are going to win in this space by helping consumers protect quality of life through accessible upgrades. So what's next, Cheryl?
Great question. Next up is our memorable experiences. And what we're seeing here is fascinating. Digital impermanence is starting to wear on people's trusts. Between opaque platforms, constantly changing rules, access that can disappear overnight, consumers have learned the hard way that what they own online isn't always really theirs. As a result, they're rethinking where real value, control, and staying power come from. So first and foremost, we see many consumers interested in the physical. This digital instability is increasing interest in physical products. When streaming libraries vanish, social accounts get locked, or digital assets lose access, ownership feels really fragile. This is fueling renewed interest in physical media, printed photography, vinyl, books, collectibles, and even analog tools like a camera. These objects can't be taken away with a policy change or a platform shutdown. Along those lines, physical goods are becoming a cultural backup. Tangible items now function as safeguards for memory, creativity, and even identity. consumers are increasingly treating physical products as long-term repositories of personal and cultural history in a world where digital archives feel increasingly unreliable. Owning something outright signals permanence in contrast to those endless subscriptions. So as a result of this, offline identity is regaining importance, right? Physical belongings can anchor identity in ways that digital only experiences and expressions can't. What we display, what we wear, what we collect communicates our taste, our values, and even our status more durably than profiles or feeds that can be reshaped or erased with the click of a button. So for brands, this means treating physical products as sources of real agency and not just accessories. These deliver durability, emotional value, and clear ownership rather than vague access. So in a world where we're seeing ongoing digital fatigue and revocable rights, products that respect permanence through transparency, longevity, and even repairability feel stabilizing and trustworthy. In fact, for many consumers, they feel genuinely premium, building on something that Brad said previously. With this in mind, let's turn to our next trend, Brad.
Sure. So we're going to get into the wellness space here. And this next theme is also about growing pushback to digital overload that we're seeing more and more of in consumer chatter. Consumers are starting to feel the limits of screen-based living, not just mentally, but now physically as well. So what we're seeing now in response is a growing desire to feel their own bodies, to feel embodied in a physical way, not just digitally. They're leaning into sensory, tactile experiences that naturally remind them of the world beyond their screens. Physical, embodied sensation helps consumers recenter themselves in a physical world that feels more authentic, more real when compared to constant digital stimulation. So what does this look like in the day-to-day experience of consumers? Well, first, disembodiment fatigue is starting to set in. Consumers spending more of their days in abstract digital environments results in the body being largely ignored. Over time, this creates a sense of nervous system overload that cognitive solutions by themselves can't fix. Consumers are realizing that the problem isn't just mental burnout, it's a lack of bodily engagement that leaves them feeling restless, feeling tense, feeling disconnected from the most tangible and most felt version of themselves. And that's why bodily awareness is becoming the new literacy. Consumers are learning that a sense of calm and peace is actually rooted in the body just as much as it is in the mind. And so they're becoming more attuned to how sensations like pressure and rhythm and resistance, sensations like temperature affect them. And they're looking for product experiences that help them self-regulate through these felt physical sensations. Bigger picture, this shift represents a reframing of wellness practices as tangible physical practices that still steady the mind and the soul, but they do it by grounding in the body first. This also explains why we're seeing more connections being made between tactile experiences and a sense of full body calm. From things like dense creams and soothing balms, physical body tools, even to things like analog knobs and switches, weighted objects. Consumers in all of these instances want a bottom-up soothing that starts from the skin and muscle and then travels to the brain. These experiences work because they offer immediate, reassuring feedback, signals that the body is safe, is grounded, and in control. Now, together, this shows us that tactile calm isn't just a niche wellness trend. It's a fundamental response to digital oversaturation. Brands that design for things like sensory engagement, physical feedback, nervous system regulation are going to be better positioned to meet consumers where they're at, where the idea of calm is now being rebuilt in the physically felt experiences of the body. So back to you for our next theme then, Cheryl.
Great. And this is a really interested, connected theme in the sense that we're seeing people rethink self-care. And what we're seeing here is after years of social fragmentation, isolation is no longer just a personal feeling. It's actually become part of our culture. And while people previously retreated into smaller, like-minded circles, we see a growing desire to reconnect, to rebuild broader communities that feel easier, lighter, and lower pressure, right? So isolation is driving people back together. Consumers are gravitating towards shared in-person experiences. There's a rise in pottery, ceramics, and artistic classes. We also see consumers turning to exercise classes with a social element. They're looking for spaces that offer connection without the pressure of really deep intimacy. Now, as I mentioned, a connection between what Brad mentioned and this trend is that we're seeing consumers think about community care as a form of self-care. Helping others is increasingly understood as emotionally restorative. Volunteering platforms, mutual aid groups, even neighborhood level initiatives like a Buy Nothing group or a local repair cafe frame contribution as a form of well-being rather than obligation. And collective care is gradually replacing purely individual self-optimization that we've seen in the wellness space. But lowering the barrier to social entry is critical here. People want connection that feels safe and structured. Smaller group formats with clear roles and shared tasks can help to reduce social anxiety. I mentioned group fitness classes or guided workshops, things that allow people to opt in and opt out as they see fit. So what does this mean for brands? There's an opportunity here to facilitate community connection. We can act as the enabler rather than the emotional center, giving people tools and reasons to gather and then stepping back and letting the magic happen. We want to design for low pressure participation. Small, structured opt-in experiences will likely outperform big performative moments. We also want to anchor connection in shared purpose. Doing something together builds trust faster than just asking people to connect in the abstract, right? So the bottom line here is that in 2026, belonging will come from a sense of usefulness, safety, and shared experience. Brands that make connection easier, but without forcing intimacy, will feel credible in a culture that is hungry for real community. All right, Brad, what's our last trend that we're going to talk about for today?
We're going to get back into the tech space and more specifically into consumer frustrations with how big tech is reaching further and further into their lives in increasingly unwelcome ways. So what's emerging in consumer conversations in response to this feeling is a deepening resistance to how much power big tech holds. Consumers want to take some of that control back for themselves. They increasingly feel that tech companies are everywhere, from not just social media feeds, but purchasing decisions, personal data, and even in some cases playing an increasing role in government. So what once felt like the promise of ever-improving convenience now feels like unwelcome intrusion, with algorithms shaping what people see, what they buy, and what they believe with very little transparency or consent. This sense of overreach is sparking a pushback, not against technology itself, but against systems that dictate behavior rather than empowering choice. Consumers want tools that serve them, not platforms that quietly steer their actions for them. One example of how that's bubbling to the surface is in how consumers are detecting a steady decline, not just in the quality and usefulness of their devices and apps, but also in their sense of fairness, as monetization is accelerating across digital platforms. They complain that ads steadily increase while features degrade and the sense of choice narrows. In a word, and this is going to be a buzzword in 2026, consumers say they're witnessing the enshittification of their digital worlds as tech companies prioritize extraction over experience. All of this is driving their sense that ultimately the social contract between big tech and society feels broken. They think the dominant tech companies operate without accountability to anyone or anything. And this belief is fueling demand for products and platforms that help people reassert autonomy, privacy, agency. Things like downloadable media or algorithm-free social spaces, private shopping platforms, VPNs, independent search engines, things like this. Consumers are gravitating toward these types of solutions because they reduce dependence and restore their sense of control. So together, these shifts are signaling a fundamental reorientation. Consumers don't just want better tech, they want fairer, more respectful systems. In 2026, the brands and the platforms that are going to gain momentum will be those that help rebuild trust by giving people real choices, clear boundaries, and meaningful control in this digital world that has started to feel overbearing. So with that, let's sum up some of our major takeaways from these emerging trends for the coming year.
Great. Yeah, let's put it all together and think about what are the key things we want to leave our audience with today. Well, first off, control and agency are the new emotional currency. Across gender, technology, embodiment, ownership, community, consumers are reacting against systems that feel extractive, opaque, or overly rigid. Whether it's reclaiming emotional expression, physical presence, real ownership, or digital autonomy, people want more say, not just more automation for the sake of automation. The implications here are that we need to think about how to design products, platform, and messaging that give control back. How can we signal clear ownership, transparent systems, opt-in participation, and respect for user choice?
Another connecting thread that we see in these trends is that consumers are looking for a future that's quieter, that's more human, that's more felt. These loud signals like the dominance-based masculinity Cheryl was talking about earlier, or things like frictionless tech, performative community, these are all losing emotional resonance. What's winning instead are things like emotional intelligence, physicality, shared responsibility, authenticity. Now, what that means for brands is that looking ahead, brands are going to need to shift from spectacle to substance. They're going to need to prioritize care, embodiment, texture, emotional literacy, and real-world relevance over optimization theater or attention-grabbing extremes.
Yeah, and building on that, progress now means balance. It's not about extremes. Consumers, let's be clear, they're not rejecting technology, independence, or even individuality. Instead, they're actively rebalancing. They want the digital and the physical, the self-care and the community care, strength along with vulnerability, premium, but also accessible. So the implications here for brands is that winners likely won't choose sides. They'll manage to successfully land in the middle, offering flexibility, hybrid experiences, and nuanced storytelling that reflects how people actually live. All right, with all of that in mind, I think we probably have time for a couple questions. Matt, what are we hearing from the audience?
Yeah, great job, guys. We got some interesting questions, definitely getting people's juices flowing. So I'll pull out the first question I see here is someone asks, when there are multiple cultural forces at work, parentheses, politics, financial, social factors, how do we decide what actually deserves attention and how to sort through the noise? So big question, but for y'all to take.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll take that one since I was covering some of the trends where we do see kind of multiple currents at play. And what I'll say here is kind of similar to what I said earlier, which is, what we need to pay attention to isn't always the loudest or most dominant force. Instead, and this is the beautiful thing about ethnography, is we can look for the right combination of emerging consensus, meaningful reach, and forward momentum. Of course, it often depends on our objective. What's our goal? What is our brand ethos, or what does our brand mean to people, as well as who is our target audience? So we need to think about what is our goal, what are we trying to achieve, and then think about how we tap into some of the trends that we've outlined today. But again, I think it's really important to not just pay attention to the loudest voice in the room. We don't always want to pay attention to the most obvious cultural currents today, because we also need to explore some of the untapped opportunities that are emerging. And that's where I think it's really important to do this type of research to figure out what is the dominant culture today, and where do we see some shifts or changes that could lead to new opportunities for our brands, products, and services. It's a great question.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think at the summary you guys gave at the end of some of the bigger overarching things about friction or agency across, I think that's a good way to sort of think about what is the takeaway. Let me pull out another question. I think we have time for one more at least. And I found this one very interesting. And someone noted there's a lot of digital pushback we're finding, I guess, from the report. But are there any ways forward for tech that are more positive?
Yeah, I'll take this one, Cheryl. That's also, another great question. And I think we probably all agree that digital engagement, digital tools are here to stay. Still, that said, the future of consumer-facing tech isn't going to be about the sorts of tools and devices that are trying to pull people back toward increased screen time, towards things like more scrolling, more notifications, that kind of thing. It's going to be more about how brands can design for digital tools that actually support and contribute to life away from screens. So like tools that give feedback about bodily experiences, biofeedback, haptic feedback, wearables, these sorts of things, for instance. Tools that can actually build bridges to real life experience, rather than cutting off or substituting digital worlds for the real world. It's not about apps that quickly summarize your group chat messages, right? In this instance, the frictionlessness actually feels artificial to consumers. Instead, it's about digital that helps you more seamlessly connect with people in the actual world, that helps you get away from purely digital or even digitally filtered interactions. So the tech itself can't be a distraction. It has to be a tool that facilitates something bigger, something real, and then gets out of the way. So I guess to kind of summarize that, the way forward with digital is to reduce dependence and instead to enable, to empower, or even to enhance experiences that give consumers control and that feel more firmly grounded in the physical world.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think that's a good sum up again, sort of that it's not like a full get rid of tech or something like that, but the pushback is one that needs to be grounded in these larger themes that we're really seeing going on, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah, great. I think we are basically out of time now. So there's a few other questions that we didn't get to, but we could follow up with those over email. And if you have other questions that come to mind after ruminating on these trends, feel free to reach out again. But I'll wrap it up. So this concludes our webinar. Some advertising. We have another webinar from the Consumer Insights teams on February 24th about unlocking the power of jobs to be done. So a different methodology that's complementary if you want to come and attend that. The slide presentation and recording from today's webinar will be sent around to all the attendees via email. When you're leaving, there will be a prompt to complete a survey on today's presentation, and we always appreciate any feedback you guys have to inform and improve our future webinars. And yeah, check out our website for any other things that are happening. And thank you very much, Cheryl and Brad. I think this was very informative, very timely, and very interesting to see how this is going to evolve over the coming year.